Ready to go, Claire.
Okay. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another issue of Sharia Crime Stoppers. I'm Clare Lopez, and tonight I will be a little off the track, the usual track of Sharia, back to coronavirus, because there's just been so much going on in the last week, certainly circulating about the internet and on social media. And what I wanted to do was to preview for you an article that I have written and submitted already. It should be published up online in the next day or two, I expect, but you're going to get an advanced version of it tonight, and I will let you hear what is in the article. I call this Made in China. Now, there's little doubt anymore, I think, among anybody that the COVID-19 originated in China. COVID-19, of course, stands for coronavirus disease 19, meaning 2019. It originated in China. It is very possible, I think it's likely even, that the Wuhan coronavirus, I sometimes call it that, the Wuhan coronavirus, because that's where it came from, was not released into the world on purpose. But it's also a fact that the Chinese Communist regime runs a very sophisticated, advanced offensive biological weapons program. And Chinese researchers at Beijing's only declared BSL-4, that's Biosafety Level 4 lab, the one at Wuhan, the Wuhan Virology Institute, they've been publishing papers openly on the internet. They're posted in the scientific literature for years now, explaining exactly how they were manipulating the genetic material of various different coronavirus strains. They were not just out there, though, looking for prophylactic drugs, in other words, treatments or vaccines to counter various existing virus pathogens. No. In the lab, they actually deliberately created new viruses by combining genetic material from pre-existing viruses in ways that are extremely unlikely to happen naturally, even by way of the typically active mutations that occur normally with RNA, ribonucleic acid viruses like coronaviruses. Then, whether on purpose or not, that Frankenstein virus got out. It got loose. Now, to put things in context, I want to start by talking about a book that I really would recommend you all to take a look at. You can get it online. It's a paperback at Amazon, very inexpensive, not a very thick paperback. It was written by two Chinese communist colonels in the People's Liberation Army back in 1999 in Mandarin, but it was translated some years later, and you can now find it in the English translation, Unrestricted Warfare, China's Master Plan to Destroy America. Now, our good friend, Steve Coughlin, has written a very comprehensive analysis of the COVID-19 pandemic. It's at his website, Unconstrained Analytics. And the title of this paper that he's written is called Formation of a COVID Red Team. And it begins with a close look at this Chinese warfare handbook. That's why I think it's worthwhile to look at both of these, Steve's website and his paper and the book. Now, Steve warns that the United States is ill prepared to defend itself against hostilities that are waged at the political warfare level. We often focus here on the kinetic, the violent. If it's not in front of us, it's not going bang, not killing somebody, knocking down a big building, we don't get it. It doesn't register, and we don't respond appropriately either. That's Steve's point. Now, unrestricted warfare is an amazingly, I think, candid battle plan for waging war across a span of methods of operations that explicitly include biochemical warfare. They actually list that in the book. among other things like diplomatic warfare, economic warfare, electronic warfare, space warfare, and a lot more. Now, the point of the two colonels' thesis is that warfare should not be confined merely to military means, but by combining other such methods. They say, quote, the other army is subdued without fighting. See, the departure from the kinetic here in their thinking. Now, another book, the one that I'm reading right now, as a matter of fact, is by China scholar Michael Pillsbury. He is the director of the Center on Chinese Strategy at the Hudson Institute. He's a brilliant China scholar with decades of service in presidential administrations going back to the 1970s. In 2016, though, this is the book, he published the book in 2016, and it draws on that very deep understanding of Chinese culture and history and thinking. He's a fluent Mandarin speaker. The name of the book is The 100-Year Marathon, China's Secret Strategy to Replace America as the Global Superpower. I really recommend, it's a fascinating read. And it puts unrestricted warfare into an historical context that span millennia, really, because Michael Pillsbury goes back into Chinese history and explains how current communist Chinese rulers of China are steeped in that history, the knowledge of that history, and they draw on it constantly in their own comments when speaking in Mandarin, but all too often those comments are difficult to translate, number one, but number two, just go right past Westerners. Now, one of the most important themes that Michael Pillsbury talks about is that while the current communist Chinese regime of Xi Jinping is, as I said, steeped in the knowledge of how its historical predecessors, especially during what's called the Warring States period, that spanned hundreds of years, pre-BC, and how the warlords of that time used cunning and deceit and ruthlessness and tremendous patience to defeat their rival warlords. We in the West, and especially here in the United States, we neither know nor appreciate much that happened before what we'd call the Common Era, I guess. And that brings us back to COVID-19. All right, so a terrific young journalist at the Epoch Times named Joshua Phillip, maybe some of you have seen him, read him, or perhaps watched this documentary film that's really making the rounds on the internet. And I watched it, spent a lot of time with it actually last week, taking notes from it, called Tracking Down the Origin of the Wuhan Coronavirus. Now, Phillip researched a vast amount of openly available information. It's all out there, but he took the time to put it all together in a way that's really very accessible. It's a good, easy to follow video. I think it's about 46 minutes long, and it's very accessible to the average viewer who's not a scientist or, you know, some kind of medical specialist, which I am not. But he reports on the names, the labs, the timeline, medical science behind everything. But he doesn't overwhelm us all with complicated, you know, technical jargon. The bottom line up front is this. The Wuhan coronavirus did not come from bats at the Wuhan, as they call it, the Huanan seafood wholesale market. No, this Wuhan coronavirus came from a Chinese laboratory where researchers deliberately experimented with ways to make both pre-existing and recombinant, that means putting together from different things, viruses more communicable and more effective at getting inside human cells, because that's what viruses do. Now, as Phillip demonstrates in his film, Chinese researchers have been working on coronaviruses for years. Of course, it's an entire family of viruses, right? So it's the common flu, it's the common cold, it's SARS, severe acute respiratory syndrome, MERS, Middle East respiratory syndrome. A whole bunch of coronaviruses belong to the same family. They're distinct. They've emerged at different points in time. They are different from one another, but they belong to this overall family of viruses. Now, as we mentioned, these earlier viruses like SARS and MERS and H1N1, or it's sometimes called the swine flu, they all came out of China too. The Wuhan Institute of Virology is a subsidiary of the Chinese Academy of Sciences. It was established, the Wuhan Virology Institute was established in 2003 with help from the French government in the wake of the SARS outbreak. And due to myriad security concerns, the Wuhan Virology Institute itself didn't become operational as a P4 or pathogen or protection level 4, BSL4, right? Laboratory until 2017. Its key laboratory of special pathogens and biosafety, that lab is of particular concern. Let's talk about that for a minute here. Now, long before 2017, senior and internationally well-known researchers like Shi Zhenli, remember her name? In Mandarin, the surname comes first and the first name comes second. So her surname is Shi, Ms. Shi, or Dr. Shi Zhenli. She worked in this special pathogens lab, and they were experimenting, she and others. Well, she and others were experimenting on how to enhance the capacity of the coronavirus for transmission across species and specifically from animal reservoirs to humans. Shi Zhenli is widely known as the Bat Lady, and that's because she's done a lot of work with bat coronaviruses, and she's gone hunting and searching inside of bat caves to bring back bats to the laboratory for research there. Now, she apparently, to the best of what we can tell, has now disappeared in the wake of the notoriety. But she earlier published a number of papers in respected peer-reviewed journals like Nature Medicine, for one. During the Obama administration here in the United States, now get this, the communist Chinese regime even paid the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill to include Shi in what they call a gain of function study on the potential for combining existing SARS coronavirus genetic material together with that special spike protein, that spiky part that you've seen in pictures coming out of the coronavirus in those images I'm sure you've seen online. Those spiky things, that's what gives it its name, corona, like the spikes on a crown, corona crown, right? But they're made of protein. They're protein spikes. So she was working on those to combine them with the SARS coronavirus genetic material in ways that would also transmit more readily and emerge in humans. Now, they were using the Chinese horseshoe bat for these experiments. Now, such synthetic laboratory created hybrid viruses, hybrid meaning put together in the lab, they're called a chimera. It's a Greek word. It just means something that's put together from disparate parts to make one artificial, in this case synthetic, new virus, a chimera. And it was shown to be capable in the lab of robust viral replication, because that's what viruses do, they replicate, both in vitro, that means in a petri dish, right, in the lab, and in vivo, and that means in animals. In this case, they were using mice in that laboratory. The in vivo reference indeed is to mice, and they were used to show how this chimera's deadly capabilities could express themselves in mammals. Now, it seems they were probably going to go on from mice after that to higher order animals, but we don't have all of that information right now, or at least I don't. What this means is that the researchers in this lab created something artificially in the lab that had never existed before and likely never would have existed if just purely in nature. Now, the University of North Carolina study before 2014 had been conducted with funding, get this, from the United States Department of Health and Human Services, HHS, under the auspices of the National Institutes of Health, and specifically the NIH's National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, headed by Dr. Anthony Fauci. The objective of the study ostensibly was to prepare for possible future virus pandemics. Okay, fine, but we see what they actually did with it. But in October 2014, HHS, this is still the Obama administration, advised the University of North Carolina that the United States government funding for such gain of function research was being paused. They cut it off, basically. They cut it off. The damage was done, though. She obviously continued the work back home at the Wuhan Institute of Virology because the results of that gain of function chimera study were published in December 2015. The issue of Nature Medicine in that month. I found it online. You can too. She's name is among a group of authors. It's a whole bunch of authors whose name is on that paper in Nature Medicine, December 2015. American researchers also, including Ralph S. Barrick, PhD, the William R. Kennan Jr., Distinguished Professor in the Department of Epidemiology and Professor of the Department of Microbiology and Immunology at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, was also named among that group of other co-authors of this study. And then it got out. The virus got out. This Frankenstein synthetic lab-created virus got loose. We don't really know how or exactly when or whether it was deliberately released. I would not say that at this point. In some kind of unrestricted warfare scenario, but get out it did. So the Chinese Communist Party goes into overdrive to cover everything up. It's their first instinct, cover it up, protect the regime. Conscientious and concerned doctors like Dr. Li Wenliang, who unfortunately later died of the disease, began trying to sound the alarm about a new virus causing symptoms of unknown cause back as early at least of December 2019, but they were silenced and effectively disappeared. Labs were ordered by the communist regime in China to destroy coronavirus samples. On January the 2nd, 2020, the Director General of the Wuhan Institute of Virology issued a strict prohibition against any dissemination of information about the Wuhan coronavirus. Okay, when Dr. Anthony Fauci says, yeah, sure, if we would have had more information earlier, we could have mitigated earlier, we could have saved thousands of lives. This is on the Chinese doorstep. This is because the Chinese communist regime did this, because they covered this up. Beginning as early as January, they were in full cover-up mode. Now, they prohibited the release of any information. They ordered the destruction of samples. And also, when the United States Centers for Disease Control and Prevention requested to send scientists over to China, to the Wuhan Virology Institute, to conduct investigation and what happened, how this happened, they were denied visas. They were not allowed to go. Obviously, the regime did not want them there. Now, here's another thing. February 7, 2020, a top PLA, that's the Chinese Army, People's Liberation Army, biological warfare expert named Chen Wei, assumed control of the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And people who apparently, supposedly once worked there, as I said, disappeared. People's names, people's bios, people's papers disappeared from the website. Then I would say things continued, right? On the 13th of March, 2020, the South China Morning Post, that is a mouthpiece for the Chinese Communist Party. It is owned by, you might remember this name, Alibaba. That is owned, the company, Alibaba, is owned by Jack Ma. It's a communist, the Chinese Communist Party, certainly associate, close associate, if not member, reported, so the Morning Post reported in March that patient 0, in fact, may have been a 55-year-old man, woman, we don't know, from Hubei province. That's where Wuhan is, the capital city of Hubei province, sort of in the south eastern or almost central southeastern part of China. But get this, they're printing this in the Communist Party media outlet, the South China Morning Post. They're printing this on 13th of March. They said that that index case contracted the disease, COVID-19, back in mid-November 2019. This is a most interesting date because just one day later, on the 18th of November 2019, the Wuhan Institute of Virology posted a job opening on its website asking for scientists to come research the relationship between the coronavirus and bats. This job posting added that the prospective job hire would, quote, answer the molecular mechanism that can coexist with Ebola and SARS-associated coronavirus. Ebola and SARS? All right, all credit here again to Joshua Phillip of the Epoch Times, who did this research and translated or had translated these things that I'm quoting to you now that originally appeared in media in Mandarin Chinese. Now, that's not all. On the 24th of December, 2019, the Institute posted another job opening that sought a candidate to research a situation in which, quote, the pathogenic biology of bats carrying important viruses has confirmed the origin of bats prior, I'm not getting this right here. The origin of bats of major new human and livestock infectious diseases such as SARS, and it goes on. Now, clearly, if this is all accurate, by November 2019, and no later than mid-December 2019, the Communist Chinese Party authorities knew they had a very serious situation on their hands, but they chose not to warn the World Health Organization until the 31st of December, very last day of the year 2019, and not until the 9th of January, more than a week later, did the Chinese authorities finally announce that a novel, that is a new kind of coronavirus, was behind the Wuhan outbreak. The city of Wuhan was not placed on lockdown until the 22nd of January, by which time many thousands, if not tens of thousands, I don't know the number, of Wuhan residents had already fled the city. They were permitted to leave Wuhan, travel throughout China and abroad. The Chinese authorities did not stop flights out of China to elsewhere in the world, including Italy, including the United States and other places, including Iran, where they no doubt spread the deadly virus for many, many weeks to unsuspecting populations the world over. This is what Dr. Anthony Fauci is talking about. We did not know because the communist Chinese regime in Beijing refused to allow this information to get out and did not fulfill their responsibilities as a member of the WHO to report it. Now, The Beijing regime already knew, for example, too, that the Wuhan coronavirus was spreading human to human long before January 2020, because according to a February 15, again, look how late that is, February 15, 2020 article. Now this one in a respected Western medical journal called The Lancet, which traced some of the early cases of this coronavirus in China. According to the Lancet article, again, published 15 February, they traced these earlier victims and they found that they had no connection to the Wuhan, Huanan seafood wholesale market. Now, given the early December 2019 admitted, I mean, Chinese admitted, right, date of those victims' illness, the patients must have been infected sometime in November, because we know that the incubation period is around 2 weeks. Now, the Communist Chinese Party also knew, as we do too now, that the horseshoe bats it tries so hard to blame for this outbreak are not even found in Hubei province. Again, Wuhan is the capital city of Hubei province. And they're not even sold in that market in Wuhan either. Maybe some people in China eat these bats somewhere, but not in Wuhan. The closest place that these horseshoe bats apparently are found in China is something like 900 kilometers away from Wuhan, in either Yunnan province or Zhejiang province, maybe in both. They knew that. They know that now, even though they're still trying to blame this outbreak on the bats. So in order for that bat coronavirus to have gotten to either the Wuhan Institute of Virology or the other institute in Wuhan, a lower level lab, a P2 level lab, is called the Wuhan Center for Disease Control and Prevention. For any researchers or scientists at either of those places to have gotten this coronavirus, this bat coronavirus, and to be working on, experimenting on them at those labs, somebody would have had to collect those bats and bring them to Wuhan. Now, it's hard to corroborate, and so I can't say for sure that this is exactly what happened, but there are reports out there that the Chinese Institute of Military Medicine in the Nanjing Command uploaded the bat SARS-like coronavirus genomic sequence obtained from bats in Zhejiang province to the US National Library of Medicine sometime in 2018. We'll leave that be for now, because there seems to be evidence that the Chinese regime and perhaps its military were actually involved in collecting the bats and thereby bringing that corona bat virus to the labs. More to be investigated on that count. I'm going to leave that there for right now. Now, China not only did not inform the rest of the world that the virus was spreading human to human, which they knew by December, certainly earlier in January, but they instead used the all too willing WHO Director General, the Director General of the WHO, Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus. I hope I'm not mispronouncing the name too badly. But they used him, and he apparently willing to play along, to propagate the lie via Twitter, in this case, on the 14th of January, 2020, that quote in the tweet from Dr. Tedros, quote, "The Chinese authorities have found no clear evidence of human-to-human transmission of the novel coronavirus identified in Wuhan, China." That was a flat-out lie. The Chinese Communist Party knew it, and Dr. Tedros certainly should have investigated further before he put out a tweet like that, because that influenced decision-making in the United States, our medical community, our national security leadership, and in the rest of the world. We took that we took the WHO at its word. Now, the final chapter in this COVID 2019 saga is yet to be written. We are here today on April the 13th, 2020. It's far from being over at this point. And full knowledge of exactly where and how this coronavirus came to be awaits further research. And maybe some of what we have relayed today will be found to be different than we first thought. So stay tuned. We've given you the most up-to-date reference and information that we could find, but there is more to be investigated. So I would say this, though. The Communist Chinese Party's deliberate concealment and deceit and different disinformation operations may never be completely explained, again, because these are deceitful disinformation operations. But we do know now, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that the 2019 novel coronavirus came out of China. We know that had the Chinese authorities responded to what it knew was a dangerous outbreak of a novel coronavirus weeks or even months earlier, the heavy toll of illness and death worldwide could have been far less. Dr. Fauci spoke absolutely the truth. It was the Communist Party cover-up that created conditions for a pandemic. The delay also allowed Beijing to buy up supplies, massive supplies. They went on a buying spree across the world of medical protective gear, even as they were still denying the reality of the virus to the rest of us. As Giulio Miatti is a great author who writes often at the Gatestone Institute, he noted in a hard-hitting piece from the 28th of March this year, 2020, at the Gatestone Institute, he wrote, quote, "The ruling elite of China seemed obsessed only with the sustainability of their totalitarian regime," end quote. He writes also that, quote, "The Chinese government's complicity in the pandemic is now an opportunity for the West to reevaluate its ties to Beijing." Exactly so. And I think that's coming. Now, to close here for today, let's go back to Steve Coughlin's paper that I cited at the beginning tonight. And we have to understand that China is at war with the United States. They said so. We believe them. And it fully intends to take advantage of our failure to recognize or respond appropriately to the Communist Chinese Party's hostilities waged at the political warfare level, as Steve puts it. Now, because whether or not Beijing deliberately released a bioweapon coronavirus that it created, its malign behavior once the pandemic was unleashed should leave us in no doubt about its true intentions. Now, Steve Coughlin recommends the formation of a COVID-19 red team by President Trump to consider America's strategic vulnerability to the full span of China's unrestricted warfare. Now, in a way, especially if the virus did get out by accident, an explanation that I'm leaning towards right now anyway, we've been given an unanticipated and pretty graphic warning about the true hegemonic ambitions of this Chinese regime. Michael Pillsbury, again, I'm reading this terrific book, The 100-Year Marathon, and he writes in there about this uniquely Chinese concept that's called Shi, S-H-I. He writes about Shi in his brilliant book, The 100-Year Marathon. And even though it's impossible to translate that exactly, as Dr. Pillsbury explains it, Shi has to do with properly understanding and then seizing strategic advantage from the flow of events, especially in warfare. And key to achieving success in shaping outcomes to one's own advantage in this almost kind of mystical world of Shi is recognizing the enemy's vulnerability without letting the enemy know that his weakness has been found out. Now, in the case of the COVID-19 pandemic, The West now has an opportunity to see exactly how the Chinese Communist leadership thinks and behaves and what they intend to do. I think perhaps before Beijing was ready for that to happen, for us to get that understanding, that view of things. And that revelation must not go to waste. We must put together that red team with top China experts, other strategic thinkers like Steve Coughlin. And we really shouldn't wait, I think, for the pandemic to abate, but that should be assembled on an urgent basis. And we should begin to take stock of where we are and where we need to go to confront the number one threat to US national security today, and that is Red China. All right, let me leave it there and open this up to your questions if you have any. Thank you very much for listening tonight.
Thank you, Claire. We have some things to talk about. Let me see if there's a question here. I agree. I'm going to just take the first question, Claire. I agree that China is a threat to the US. Islam and Sharia law is also a threat to the US. Which one is worse? Both are bad and both must be addressed by the US government. How would you prioritize these threats? Thank you. That's a question from Wes.
Well, totally agreed. And I think we have to be able to talk or walk and chew gum at the same time. There's no reason why we shouldn't be able to confront both of these threats with newly wide opened eyes. Both the Islamic threat from the Islamic movement, Muslim Brotherhood in this country, other jihad organizations all over the world, Al-Qaeda, Islamic State, Taliban, Boko Haram, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Iranian regime, etc., and the very deadly threat coming from the Beijing Communist Chinese Party as well.
We have another questions are starting to come in. We've got a question from Deborah. I will just say Midwest Deborah at this point, and her comment is brilliant analysis as usual. Thank you. So
thank
we
you,
appreciate
Debbie.
that comment, and it's very, very appropriate. Okay. Diane says there has been some criticism of Dr. Fauci, but do you think there's a chance the president will replace him?
No, none. If you perhaps listened, as I was doing just before we started here tonight, to this evening's press conference from the White House, the president has made very clear that he continues to place trust in both Dr. Fauci and Dr. Deborah Birx. And Dr. Fauci, when he was up at the podium, absolutely laid to rest any reporters, these leading questions they pose about trying to insert a wedge somehow between him and the president. Look, Dr. Fauci is a brilliant medical doctor, but he doesn't have expertise in economics, and we shouldn't expect him to. He spent decades of his life in a very specific specialty, and that is infectious diseases, epidemiology. That is his expertise. It's up to the president to gather around him a group of different experts, Larry Kudlow, Mnuchin, Secretary Mnuchin for economic matters, while he listens to the doctors on the medical matters, and then the president synthesizes those and has to come up with the final decisions on where we go from here.
Well, Claire, that's a great explanation of what the president's job is and his skill set to do that as a businessman. You do all of those things, including dealing with the issues that maybe one advisor is in opposition to another. It's your job to make the call. And I think about having the president who's a businessman and a character that he has in office versus the other people that could be in office who are politicians their whole life and love to deal with agendas and all that other stuff. So I think that's a very good explanation of what we look for the president to do. Another question would be, can you give us more, name the film you're referring to? I think it's, I've seen it, I believe it, but I think you said Joshua Phillips. How do we find that?
Yeah,
film?
so here, I'll look for the exact name of it. Where did I put that? Let's see. Here we go. So look up Joshua Phillip, Philipp, Joshua Phillip, at the Epoch Times. You can go to the Epoch Times, EPOCH, Epoch Times website, and the name of the documentary film, it's all over the place. Elsewhere on social media, I'm sure people have seen it. It's called Tracking Down the Origin of Wuhan Coronavirus. Tracking Down the Origin of Wuhan Coronavirus. I'm sure you'll find it if you plug those search terms into your browser.
And we do like to always mention action items. This would be a great action item for our listeners. Let people who haven't seen it get a piece of this. This is the kind of thing that hits a new chord. This is different than all the other things we talk about. It's related, as you said, but it may actually capture people who are not paying attention, who don't think we're in a war. This may be the thing that wakes them up. So an action item would be to pass on access to the film. We have another question here from Roger. Trevor Loudon has noted the connection between the Soviets and Islam. What evidence is there for an association between China and Islam?
Oh, that's quite a different story. You may be familiar with the Muslim minority population called the Uyghurs out in the far western province of Xinjiang of China. That province butts up border-wise right up to the Central Asian republics that used to be part of the Soviet Union, now are independent republics, right? Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan, and also Afghanistan. And that province, populated by Uyghur Muslims, is a hotbed of jihad. It is a place that China has cracked down on very hard to suppress the separatist jihadist movement that wants to establish there and with the 5 Central Asian republics, something they want to call East Turkestan. So there's a very definite conflict going on there. And they are not aligned in any way. China sees Islam from centuries ago as an invader, as a hostile adversary, and vice versa. So I don't see any alignment there. You know, it's a toss-up right now. If you have to pit these two civilizations together, Islam and China, I think my money's on China.
Well, Claire, let's think about this. I think that's an important analysis. The one thing they do share in common, I would think they both see Donald Trump as a major block for their goals. So in that regard, they may not work together, but it would seem like they would share a goal that they don't want Donald Trump to be the president. Is that fair?
That's a very good point. Actually, absolutely true. And I will say this. The Chinese Communist Party of Beijing actually works very closely with the Islamic Republic of Iran. And not just on nuclear matters, which they do, ballistic missile matters, which they do, but also on the full gamut of WMD, weapons of mass destruction, to include biological and chemical warfare. So in that sense, you've got these two nation states which are far enough separated geographically, I guess, that there is no adversarial potential there at the moment anyway. And so China does work very closely with the Islamic Republic of Iran on all kinds of things, yes.
And I guess we have evidence about to the degree there's any intimacy between those two countries. Look at what happened to Iran on the virus. Iran basically at a leadership level, perhaps for whatever reason, including travel back and forth. So I think that's another connection as well. So this is a lively interaction tonight. This is good. So this goes back to a previous answer about Dr. Fauci. The question is, are you discounting Dr. Fauci's close relationship with the Obama administration operatives, for example, Hillary Clinton? So I think that's just a point of curiosity. People have seen Fauci
Dr. Fauci has been in his position at the National Institutes of Health, at the National Institute for what do we call it? Epidemiology? No, infectious diseases and allergy for decades. The man is 79 years old, and he has been there since I think it's at least the 1980s. So it's very natural that at that senior level, of medical science in the United States that he is familiar with and has interacted with a whole host of senior American leadership figures, the procession of different administrations over the years, the decades, as well as on the international level at the United Nations, at the WHO, and with other international epidemiological and medical organizations. That's his lane. You see, that's his world. It's not economics. He's not some kind of deep state plant or any of those kinds of things you probably have seen on the internet. He's purely a medical doctor, and a very brilliant one. But no, he doesn't know economics the way Secretary Mnuchin does, or the way Larry Kudlow does. No, not at all.
Okay, another question. What do you think of the models that are being used to shut down the American economy? This is from Deborah again. Minnesota's Governor Walz just extended his emergency measures until May 13th. I don't know how the American economy can survive the shutdown.
Well, I live in Virginia, and our governor, Governor Blackface Northam, has shut us down here in the state of Virginia, supposedly until June the 10th. Now, I'm very hopeful it's not really going to last that long. But this is a fine line that President Trump has been treading. Obviously, mitigation, that is, I don't call it social distancing, by the way. We're closer socially than we've ever been. I've had more webinar Zoom meetings with my family in the last 2 or 3 weeks than I've had in my entire life. It's physical distancing that we're doing here. Mitigation is about physical distancing, and that absolutely works. Quarantine works when it's proper and defined and enforced. But then there comes that fine line. At what point are we destroying the biggest, best, most fantastic economy on the face of the earth the world has ever seen, the United States economy? This is what the president is talking about when he says he's got the most difficult decision he's ever made in front of him, and he has to make up his mind when to give the signal to the governors that it is okay to begin at least phasing in a gradual way, opening back up. Now, certainly there are places in this country, particularly, let's say, in the western states, some of the big midwestern states, where the number of cases is small, where maybe the outbreak has been confined to an urban area, 1 or 2. Those are the kind of places that can open back up more quickly than perhaps a place like New York, New York City. So it's a decision of the governors. The president has the authority and the decision making to announce a recommendation, but it's up to the governors who will have to, state by state, make that decision. And it's a tough call, but I really think that we're going to start seeing some places open up again by early May, because we really can't go much farther than that without catastrophic damage, in my opinion anyway, to the economy.
Well, Claire, just to comment on that, we've seen that Israel is starting to talk about a 4-phase plan to reopen their economy. Mm-hmm. Phase 1 takes, each phase is about a 2-week experiment, and it's very detailed, including even when certain younger children would be allowed to go to school, where older children would be kept home. And so there's other models I'm sure that we're looking at. It sounds like it's probably the most difficult, one of the most important things he will do this year relative to his own presidency, et cetera, is the decision to move ahead and at what pace, et cetera. So it sounds like
Mm-hmm.
It's
here's the thing, eventually all of us will have to be exposed to this virus in one way or another if we want immunity, or for however long that immunity may last, which we don't even know because the virus is mutating out in the wild. It's a whole nother subject. But we're all going to have to be exposed to it one way or another. One way would be gradually being exposed to some manageable viral load that our own immune systems can handle and overcome. The other way eventually, and this is at least a year out, will be with a vaccine. But the point of the mitigation was, as they said over and over, to flatten the curve so that a whole huge bunch of cases didn't hit our medical system or specific medical systems of New York City, Washington, D.C., Chicago, Illinois, all at once and overwhelm them. If it's spread out, this doesn't mean that there won't be more cases, or as we open up that people won't catch this. They will. But I think confidence can begin when we realize, number one, a vaccine will be coming eventually. Number two, the vast majority of people who catch this thing recover from it, like over 98% recover. A whole bunch of them don't even know they have it, or at least have a mild case, or maybe they feel crummy for a while and then they get better. But number three is that once we all realize that there are drugs, prophylactic drugs, like hydroxychloroquine used in combination with the antibiotic azithromycin and the zinc sulfate, or remdesivir is another one. There are many others in testing and development right now. Once we realize there are drugs out there that can help us get better, if we even do catch it, I think there'll be a lot less fear and a lot less worry about stepping outside again.
Claire, this is a question, because it's a question that I don't think there's an answer to, but when people do their research, you mentioned back at the University of North Carolina and all that research over a period of years, and you mentioned the Dr. Shi, people that's their life, that's what they work on. Do they, in the process of developing this research, is there not along the way notions about a vaccine? In other words, why do we have to wait? Why would we have to? Here's the question. There are people that are commenting on the fact that the Chinese leadership don't seem to have been affected, yet you have other countries, including Iran and others, where leadership was affected with the virus. Does it seem potentially that there might have been some kind of an early virus that existed all this time that we just don't know about, and that somehow the Chinese leadership was protected? The reason people raise that question is the Johns Hopkins database, which could be loaded with bad data, shows a remarkable number of deaths in Beijing. Deaths in Beijing and deaths in Shanghai are minuscule. Mm-hmm. And yet,
well, if you believe the figures, yeah.
I got it. Yes.
Which I
mean, that's okay. So, I mean, that would be the obvious answer. I guess the question would be, has anybody even looking into the notion that there may actually have been some kind of a vaccination that has been provided selectively to elites so that they're avoiding the problems the rest of the world is suffering under?
Possibly, but you know, there is still no vaccine for SARS or MERS,
okay, or
H1N1, although there are annual ordinary influenza flu vaccines, but those are crapshoots. They're a guessing game of what variation of this virus or viruses, the collection of viruses, will we counter with this vaccine this year? Because as I said before, a virus mutates. Once it's out of anyone's control, and it mutates on a random and continual basis. So we don't even know what forms it may take or has taken even since escaping this particular coronavirus. Since escaping, as I think it had done, but it did escape. I don't think it was deliberately put out from the Wuhan Institute. So the other point, though, and I know it's a little complicated. I was trying to explain this, but what those scientists did, like Dr. Shi, the bat lady, what they did is they weren't even looking for a drug or a vaccine for a virus that already existed. A coronavirus that already existed, be it the bat coronavirus or something else. No, they created in the laboratory, they stuck stuff together. You know the CRISPR technique, this little, you might think of it as a little molecular scissors that can snip out, cut, and then paste sequences of from the genomic sequence, take it out of one, put it in another. Okay, that's what they did. From the bat coronavirus, from the HIV virus, from SARS. And they artificially, synthetically snipped, copy pasted to create a whole brand new entity that I think, and many others think, never would have existed in nature. That's what they did. And so is there a vaccine for that thing, that chimera they created? I don't know. Can there be? I don't know. Has that thing, that chimera, mutated further now that it's out in the wild?
Well, and
I don't know
obviously it sounds like a vaccine is a roll of the dice to see if you can catch up with the virus before it becomes something else.
Or
and you
make
can have
it broad spectrum enough that it covers a bunch of viruses. For example, by disabling those little spiky things again, those protein spiky things, because that's what latches onto a human cell. And if they can disable they call it the S protein, spiky thing, I call it. If they can disable that, that goes for a whole bunch of viruses. You see, that's the kind of broader spectrum vaccine that they might be able to create, hopefully.
Okay, well, I'll just share with you, there's a number of people that just want to continue to chew on Dr. Fauci, but we don't have time to do that. He's obviously got people's attention one side or the other. I think the key message here is it's up to the President of the United States to bring the economics people in to balance his choice as scientific advisors. That's his job. And as we see more of that economics, it may lessen, all of the attention being on Fauci. Fauci he has, I think, gotten people's attention by saying this may be with us for 18 months until we get the vaccination. I think that's spooking people, but it is what it is. Clare Lopez, thank you so much. We're going to let you go because I think you have another performance or another activity in just 5 minutes. So we're going to let you say a final word. We're going to invite people to stay with us for 5 minutes after you depart. If you'd like, yeah, you can just leave the meeting. But
Sorry, I have to run. It is a conference call. I promised to be on at the top of the hour here. But I guess what I would say is these are the action items for you. I recommend the film from Joshua Phillip, Epoch Times. I recommend the books, Unrestricted Warfare by the two Chinese colonels, The 100-Year Marathon by Michael Pillsbury, and definitely go to Steve Coughlin and Rich Higgins' website, Unconstrained Analytics, and look up this red team, this COVID red team report recommendation there. And if you all have more questions, I'm sorry I can't stay longer. Why don't you feed them to Midwest Dick here and the Sharia Crime Stoppers, and I'll try to get to them in coming days and answer back. Maybe we can do that?
We sure can. Yeah, you can just send those questions to dick@theunitedwest.org. We'll get the questions. We'll get them to Clare. Clare is a really important part of the United West team, and we really appreciate it. Mark your calendars. I believe, Clare, you'll be back with us again for a news analysis on Monday, May the 4th, in the rotating that we've got going. And so thank you so much. We'll invite you. If you look on your lower left, you can leave the meeting and we'll continue. Okay. Good night, Clare.
Thank you so much, Dick and Mary and everybody.
Okay. We're going to continue looking at, we're going to continue just wrapping up here quickly. We're going to basically remind everybody that we are the United West, and we see all of this fitting into the one team, one fight that we've talked about before. Let's do that, and we'll just move quickly. We talked about the action items. We're not going to play that video, but obviously the Army for Trump is a place that you can go. And at the Army for Trump, we talked last week about making calls for something at the armyfortrump.org, which is the Trump Talk, and we're inviting you to learn more about that. We know that with all the many webinars, many of you have been with us for most of them. You are so strong, you are so intelligent, you have so much information that you are well equipped to take the action to get on these Trump Talk. This is a team of people right now listening here who would be fantastic on Trump Talk. You could reach out to people across the country. We'd love for you to call into Florida and in other swing states. You have the credentials, you have the expertise. So think about jumping on Trump Talk and having that be your action item. We just want to continue. We are continuing through April with our webinars on Monday nights. The news analysis you just heard from Clare. She'll be back on the 4th of May. But in the meantime, next week is Christine Douglas Williams, who's just been a superb part of the one team with her news analysis next Monday, the 20th. Leo Holman, who got tremendous response from his work in his recent article, but his webinar is also catching on, and he was with us last week. He'll be the news analyst on the 27th. So that's Mondays, 3 Mondays in a row, and that's what we're doing ongoing. If you miss one of these webinars that are news analysis, you can go to YouTube, look at the Sharia Crime Stoppers part of YouTube, and you'll be able to see the recordings. We have an extra one, not this Thursday, but a week from Thursday on the 23rd. It's our 4th Thursday of the month. We go out to Omaha to get a live news analysis from our friend, Dr. Mark Christian. Dr. Mark Christian is an ex-Muslim. He was an imam, and now he's a Christian. And he's got some really, really thoughtful insights into what's happening in the world. So he's complementing the other folks we've got. But that'll be a Thursday on the 23rd. So we want you to be aware of that. As things happen, we may be adding other webinars. We'll keep you posted on that. We are the United West. Everything we do depends on your ability to keep us going, and we certainly appreciate that. There is a big button on unitedwest.org. It's got the word donate on it. We'd love for you to push that button and help us continue what we're doing. So with that, we're going to thank you for being with us and invite you to take a look at unitedwest.org. There's lots of information at the website as well. Our friend Mary, in addition to everything else that she does, takes care of that for us. So Mary, with that, we're going to invite Mary, if you could end the meeting, we'll say good night.